This is Two Girls, One Ghost.
Why did you say it?
I don't know.
I feel like you were just like a creepy like music player that just shorted out a little bit.
Two girls, one ghost.
Two girls, one ghost. And we are your ghostesses. That is Corinne and I am Sabrina.
Hello.
And we want to tell you all about our Patreon because listen, it's so much fun over there. And if you want to get like more tea on our personal lives and be the first to know about certain things, that's
And
the
also
place
know
to go.
about other people's personal lives because I feel like we
True.
reference some of the people that we meet and speak to every week on Patreon. So, you know, it's the inner circle.
Exclusive.
It's so exclusive.
No, but seriously, it's an amazing community. And if you want to join our Patreon, it's $5 a month and you get so many bonuses. Not only do you get the tea on our lives and everyone else's lives, but you also get tea on my mom's life. I was telling her that I was spilling the tea and she goes, "What does that mean?" And so I had to inform her. And I told her that I told her a story about like the date with that guy. But anyway, you also get episodes 1 week early and ad free. And then every month you get
both the audio and video version of those
Correct.
as well.
And then once a month, you get a bonus episode and you also get Campfire Stories, which is live every Tuesday night. You can come join us live and share your ghost stories with our Most Haunted Friends community. You can rewatch those at any time. You also get a sticker. You get a holiday card. You get to directly message us.
You get discounts on merch. We have an exclusive Patreon Discord channel specifically. And also in terms of that bonus episode, it's a full-length episode. It's just like a regular episode that is out on our feed. So it's not a shortened version or a different version of our podcast. It's just more of the stuff that you come to listen to every single week.
And did we say no ads and tea about our personal lives?
It's a great spot to be. And when things happen in the news, when there's different paranormal stuff going on, sometimes, you know, we get on there and we discuss with everybody.
Oh, and book club.
Oh my God, how could we forget? Book club. Book club is quarterly, but then we started the ACOTAR series, so it's become monthly, but really it's also quarterly. So basically, we just are always reading and always having book discussions.
Always.
If you're wondering what we're reading next, we just had our book club on September House, and we have selected a new book. So head on over to Patreon to find out what that book is.
Because right now, as we're recording, we do not know.
We don't know, which is why I'm not telling you.
We're recording from the past.
We decide at the end of every single book club meeting, people pitch books, we read the synopses, and we all vote between some of the ones that seem to be getting the most attention in the book club.
It's a democracy over there. We vote.
It is.
We hope you join us over there. And then also this is a gentle little nudge and reminder that we really appreciate if you can't support us financially on Patreon. We totally understand. But we also appreciate a free way to support us is rating and reviewing us on iTunes. And then also telling all of your friends, all of your neighbors, people on the street, put it on a bumper sticker on your car. I don't know. Just tell people about our podcast. That's also an incredible way to support us because the more our community grows, then the more support we have.
Oh, and also for Patreon, I don't think we said this, it is $5 a month. But if you pay annually, I think it's like a 15% discount.
Oh, shit. So
you save money. So then it's less than $5 a month.
That's nice.
What's the math? I don't know. $4.13. I'm not sure.
Huh. We also have merch.
I'm wearing some of it. I'm wearing the Ghost Girl hat.
You are.
You know what I like about the Ghost Girl hat is that we didn't put
like?
any branding on it outside of it just saying Ghost Girl. So it's kind of like, it feels like a little secret society. It feels like a if you know, you know sort of thing.
Yeah. And then there's just a little ghost on the back.
Yeah. Here, I'll show everyone my hat hair. But here it is.
Ghosty.
The little ghost. Ghost Girl. I like it. And Ghost Girl is an inclusive term of everyone.
Yeah.
Anyone can be a ghost girl.
Totally.
So anyone can get the hat.
Agreed. Anything paranormal happening in your life right now?
You know what? This is frustrating me so much because literally yesterday I was like, oh God, I have to tell Sabrina this. I feel like this is the theme. Every single week I'm like, I had something to tell you and I don't remember it anymore.
That's okay.
I'm going to have to start writing things down.
Yeah, I need to do that too.
Write some notes.
Okay, so I'm moving to Marblehead.
You haven't announced that on here.
Oh, you're right.
You only told campfire stories.
I told campfire stories. See,
you told Patreon months ago. but you've never talked about it on here.
Okay, well, hi everyone. Here's the tea, which people on Patreon got months ago. I am moving to Marblehead, Massachusetts. Bought a house and it was built in the 1700s. It predates the formation of the United States of America. And I might have plenty of ghost stories by the time we are recording there.
I'm sure you will.
I'm going to be so scared to sleep there alone for the first time. Like, I don't know how I'm going to do it.
Wait, really?
The first time. It's because I'm going to be.
Yeah. Just because you're thinking about how old it is.
The house has such good vibes and I'm going to do like a whole intention setting. I'm going to like also like thank the house and I'll probably, put little like crystals or whatever. I'm going to ask our witches, our coven, and do some of my own like intention setting and figure out what works for me. But I had a feeling I was like, what if they wait until I'm alone to like make their presence known? Not that they'll be negative, but that they'll be like, ooh.
Well, because you got such good vibes from the house too.
did.
Because you literally physically came out to Marblehead to see the house, did the whole walkthrough. I don't know. All of Marblehead has so much activity. I told you my friend Allison, where she was renting is like maybe like 2 blocks from where your house is. And they had a lot of activity too, but it was like little things, like little things here and there. So maybe you'll get something like that where it's like not exceptionally spooky. Like my friend Caitlin, she bought a house nearby Marblehead too, a little bit closer to where I am. And she hears the woman who built the house, like walking around and doing stuff.
Yeah.
In the middle of the day. So it's like you hear stuff, but maybe you won't see stuff and that will make it a little bit better.
This house has a historical plaque. So there's so many records, I'm sure, and probably like a lot of history that I can find out about the house. I really want to do my research and due diligence and like learn about the people who lived in the house and understand what their lives were so that I can honor them and actually know who they are. And I want to make a little book.
Okay. That's a great idea because I was literally just about to pitch to you. So Farmhouse Fixer is one of my favorite shows. Jonathan Knight from New Kids on the Block, and then this local Manchester-based interior designer in Massachusetts, Kristen. They have a show where they like not really renovate. They basically like restore/renovate old farmhouses to like bring them back to life.
That's cool.
Throughout the North Shore of Massachusetts, which is where I live, which is where you will live when this comes out.
I'll be living when this is out.
I can't believe I'm saying it. I'm like literally about to tear up. Oh my God. Holy shit. It hits me a little bit more every day. I'm like, Sabrina, I'm literally tearing up right now.
My favorite text that you sent me was, what'd you say? I need to read it verbatim. It was amazing.
It's one of those things where like, I feel like I was hoping and wishing for it for so long. And now that it's happening, I'm like trying to not let myself get excited until you literally, like I see you walking into the house with a key.
Oh, this is what you said. Immediately got the excited poops. Now my body is really letting me believe and celebrate.
Immediately had to poop.
We're recording this on April 6th? I'm going to be there next weekend.
I know oh my God. Oh, but what I was saying was in Farmhouse Fixer, they had this one episode, which is what I was going to pitch to you, but a book is totally fine. But they found out the history. Yeah, you can do whatever you want, I guess, with your own house. But they found out the history of every single owner who had previously lived in this one house. And there were these really big, old, reclaimed beams that went across the top of one of the rooms. And they had seared into each beam as part of the show, the last name, like the surname of every single family who had ever lived there. So like as you're walking down this big
so cool
room and you look up at the beams, like here and there in the beams, you'll see, like Richardson, Donalds, Smiths, the Blacks. You'll see all the names.
That's so cool.
I know. I thought it was a great way
to figure that out.
Oh my gosh. Wait, I didn't even mention.
What?
This is reminding me. So from Farmhouse Fixer, Brian and I found this other place called The Grove. It's a restaurant and it's also a hotel, but it's in Rowley, Massachusetts, which is on the North Shore. And we've gone multiple times. The last time I was there, did I even tell you this when we were together in Marblehead?
No.
Okay, this is the pregnancy brain thing. Because it was literally, I saw you like 1 hour later. Shout out to Caitlin, the assistant manager. I didn't tell you this?
I don't know. I don't know what you're going to tell me.
Okay. Well, the assistant manager, Caitlin, came up to me. Well, I was walking to the bathroom and she was right there. And she was like, "Excuse me, is your name Corinne?" And I just grabbed her. I said, "You listen?"
Oh, yes. You did tell me this. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she gave me chocolate chip cookies and ice cream. So thank you. But I did ask her if she was there when they filmed Farmhouse Fixer, because that's how we had discovered that restaurant. She was not.
Oh.
Anyway, shout out to Caitlin. Thank you for the cookies and for the ice cream. You made my day, and you really made Brian's day. He kept being like, this is huge for me. This is really huge. Because chocolate chip cookies are like his favorite thing in the world.
They are literally his favorite thing in the world.
And I looked cool in front of Jill and Wes because I was with them too,
cool.
So.
You're so cool.
Thanks.
Well, stay tuned in a couple weeks. Once I'm like out there, I'm going to get a lot more ghost stories, because apparently there's an entity called the Screecher in Marblehead.
Yeah. Which I liked the other day when Leia started screeching and you were like, maybe she's the Marblehead Screecher.
She will be a different Marblehead Screecher. People will get very confused. They'll be like, the Screecher's coming from this house. And it's like, no, it's Leia.
No. You'll have to do a full Marblehead episode.
Absolutely. I'm going to get like stories from all the locals. Oh, that's so fun. But until then, I have a story actually coming from North Carolina. And I want to just give a shout out. I apologize. I do not remember what listener gave us this book, but this was a book that I had in my like TGOG gifts collection. Mm-hmm. And it is called Haunted Broughton, More Tales from the Graveyard Shift by Margaret M Langley. And I read that book for today's episode. So shout out to Margaret M Langley. I highly recommend. She's actually written 3 books all about this one hospital.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of activity and a lot of history here.
So much. There's so many ghost stories. It's kind of fantastic. To preface this, we here at Two Girls, One Ghost are massive mental health advocates, love mental health care. And I'll speak for myself here. Me here, one ghost of Two Girls, One Ghost is a mentally ill ghoulie. So shout out to all of you sick in the head peeps. We hope that
this reminds me, not to go on a side tangent already, but the other day, my mom and I were talking about therapy, and I was like, everyone should go to therapy. Like, you guys need to go to therapy. Your generation needs to go to therapy. You and your siblings, your friends, everyone should go to therapy. And she was like, well, I believe that everyone should go to therapy. And I was like, we do. The rest of the generations below your generation, we do go to therapy. I was first in therapy when I was 14, Mom. I was like, It's you guys. You need to go to therapy.
Right.
She was like, I guess that's a good point. I was like, all of the people below you go.
It is sad, though, because I recently changed my health insurance. And before, when I was on the WGA health insurance, they had like incredible mental health care and coverage. But when I changed my insurance, their psychiatric care is just not nearly as good. And also, like, when I did my trauma treatment, I had to pay out of pocket. My insurance didn't cover it. Like, it was really, really expensive. And so it's tough and sad that it's not as accessible as I would like it to be.
I know. And that's coming from someone who even has healthcare, like there's a lot of people that don't.
100%.
Yeah, it's really messed up. It needs to be better.
Agreed. But I will say I am glad and grateful that the mental health industry is different than it was in the beginnings of this story.
Okay.
So we've talked a lot about psychiatric hospitals and mental asylums, as they were called back in the day. And so they kind of have a lot of commonalities where they demonstrate the atrocities of mental health care and the kind of archaic and barbaric practices of lobotomies and electric shock therapy. And this story, too, has a history and a past that is shrouded in despair, horrors, and death, and malpractices. We've told this type of story a lot, so I'm going to kind of give a brief history of Broughton Hospital, which is in North Carolina, and then I'm going to get into the hauntings.
Lovely.
Okay. So today we are discussing Broughton Hospital in North Carolina, a place that throughout the years was a place of terror, and no matter how many new layers of paint or changes were made to the building, the past is forever stained on the walls and the land. It is a place equally haunted by past wrongdoings and haunted by spirits of deceased staff members and patients.
Staff members too. That's always interesting. I feel like the assumption is patients because of the horrific things that happened to people in the past, but it is always interesting when there's some staff members. That's like the very first episode you did, right? Caught on tape, or was it
episode 3, Caught on Camera?
Yeah, with
Waverly
woman
Hills.
from Waverly Hills.
Mm-hmm.
Mary in the basement.
And there's actually a lot of stories very similar to that. And I have to say, I'm so grateful that Margaret wrote this book because there are so many places in the world with hauntings and like even hospitals where there's so many hauntings, but no one really puts them together, you know? And for Margaret to have collected all of these stories, she's done a lot of research. She found like old archives and archival newspaper articles and like maps of the original property, which are really small and hard to see in the images on the book. So they don't fully translate to video. But if you read the book, she did a lot of work for this. And I'm grateful for that.
It's like she did a genealogy project, but it wasn't about her family. It was just about this one single place.
Yeah.
You got to hunt down the documents.
Totally. So I'm going to give a little haunting teaser before the history. Strange deaths, missing objects, dancing duos, murder-suicides, haunted tunnels, people in the windows, ghostly apparitions, and ghastly murders. Broughton Hospital has it all. Do you like happy, pleasant ghosts? They've got them. Do you like mysterious true crime and tragedy? They've got them. Do you like ghost kids, creepy shadows, and pesky poltergeists? They've got them. Broughton Hospital is a psychiatric hospital located in Morganton, North Carolina, and it was built and opened in March of 1883. And it kind of was a 25 plus year process. So Dorothea Dix, who is a mental or was a mental health advocate back in the 1850s, petitioned the North Carolina General Assembly to build a psychiatric hospital. I think there was like one general hospital that was kind of serving as one size fits all. And Dorothea Dix was like, we need more mental health care. Can you commission a psychiatric hospital?
Which is great in theory.
Right. And I will say in the very beginnings of this hospital, there was so much positivity. And the first superintendent is someone that we will talk about a couple times in this episode, who seems like the most lovely man. And it wasn't until after his death that the practices kind of went more towards what we remember and have talked about in the horrific side of things. So it opened in March of 1883. And I could not find more information about this, but there was like this one little tidbit that's kind of in every article I read about this hospital. The very first admitted patient to the asylum was a physician, and his name was Dr. Red Pepper.
Interesting. Is he somehow related to the people who made Dr. Pepper? Because
no, I looked it up and it's like there's no association. There's no connection at all.
Because even like some of the labels and stuff, like I'm just thinking about the color scheme and everything.
I know.
Interesting.
I could not find any more information about him.
Well, honestly, I'm glad that he was the first patient because I feel like sometimes the people who need help the most are the people that are in positions to help others, and they just see a lot of shit. They hold a lot of other people's baggage, and that can be really taxing.
I mean, I think about all of the therapists I've ever had. I feel like they themselves have gone through a lot of emotional, mental health work themselves, which has made them so empathetic, which is why they're so good at their profession.
Well, it's like that show on HBO. I think it's called Couples Therapy. I've told you about it before.
You tell me about it, yeah.
It cuts from scenes of this therapist who's incredible, like working with these different couples, to her talking about all of this stuff, like basically with her own mentor / therapist. So it is really interesting.
Okay. So as with many other psychiatric facilities, Broughton Hospital initially called the Western Carolina Insane Asylum. And then over years it changed names. But when it initially opened, as with many other asylums that we've seen and heard in the past, it was opened with good intentions, and doctors were determined to put patient health at the forefront. And it was kind of like, a self-functioning colony or commune. There was dairy farm, there was a vineyard, there were greenhouses. I think the initial patients were actually kind of used in like a hard labor type of situation where they like built the roads and paved the roads to the hospital and kind of did some of the harder labor.
Okay. Yeah. Reminds me a lot of the jails and like the children's facilities and all that. Yeah. That is common or was common.
So it opened in March of 1883. For about 50-ish years, it was pretty with that intention of taking care of patients. That was at the forefront. And that was pretty much what they did for 50 years. But then very quickly by the 1920s, the patient to physician ratio was 300 patients to one physician. Then By the
How would
1930s,
anyone actually be treated at that
that's
point?
the thing. By the 1930s, so 10 years later, it was 500 patients to one physician.
So the majority of people that are patients are probably never, ever making contact with the physician.
No, they're probably just like laid up in a bed in a massive room with a bunch of other patients and not being cared for. And then also
Yeah.
there's so many different levels of care that's existing at this place where there's some that probably need just like general psychiatric care. And they probably were overlooked so much because then there were the patients
Yeah.
who were extreme cases that needed way more attention and care that probably got all of it.
Right. And if you're not actually meeting with any patient, like how are you to know what they're supposed to have if there's not even an ounce of individualized care here?
So, as also was commonplace with a lot of psychiatric hospitals at this time, there were devastating malpractices and mistreatment of patients, thousands of deaths, suicides, unethical treatments, missing persons, and even murders. The hospital changed names many times, eventually taking on its current namesake in 1959, Broughton Hospital. There's a photo here of Broughton Hospital if you want to see it on YouTube. It is beautiful. It's like very gothic looking. There's over 60 buildings, which I think in recent years, some of them have been demolished or some of them have been renovated, but the hospital is on the National Register of Historic Places and encompasses around 60 buildings. And it is often regarded as one of the most beautiful hospitals in the US.
Wow.
It's really beautiful. It's a gothic, it's got like a rich reddish tone to it. It's over 125 years old, and it also has a massive, complex tunnel system built beneath all of the buildings.
That is freaking cool and very scary.
And there's a lot of mystery with its tunnels. Like, why were they built? There's a lot of legend, and we'll get to that in a minute, but it's not clear why they were built the way that they were.
Okay, I'm looking at the photo of the hospital, and this literally looks like a university. Like, this looks like a college. It's so huge.
I know, it's massive.
And the tunnels are creepy, but they're also kind of beautiful, and they remind me of a wine cellar.
Yeah.
But I know that they weren't used for storing wine.
They were not. No. I'm sure you can imagine there are some terrifying legends about these tunnels. But today, the hospital is still in operation, so it is really hard. The only way we know these ghost stories is because Margaret has recorded them and documented them from her own personal experiences and then also experiences of other staff members or patients that she has encountered. But it is an operating hospital to this day, so they don't offer tours. You can't go ghost hunt or paranormal investigate. In the end of her book, she writes, like, I hope one day that they open up this hospital for, history tours and are more upfront about the paranormal activity. But as far as the hauntings, we only know about them really because Margaret has documented them.
Okay.
So today, the hospital supports North Carolinian residents. I think it serves 35% of North Carolina, like the counties that are in like that region. They support residents and families experiencing mental illness. They serve around 800 patients a year and employ nearly 1,200 staff members. All to say, basically, it still operates as a psychiatric hospital with over 1,500 reported deaths on the property and the horrors that many face on the land. The number of ghosts now outnumber the staff and patients, just as the patients once outnumbered the physicians back in the day.
Holy crap. It's a lot of ghosts.
A lot of ghosts. So shall we get to the hauntings?
Yes.
Thanks again to Margaret M Langley, who has actually written 3 books about it. I did a little research about Margaret. She's a woman of mystery because she has written these books, but she doesn't really have like a bio in any of the books. And then it took me a really long time to find her bio about her.
That's very spooky of her, and I appreciate that. I kind of like it.
She's kind of like, this isn't about me.
Right. She feels like the least important part of it, despite us not having this information without her.
Margaret has lived in North Carolina for most of her life, and as of 2010 was continuing to work the night shift as a RN in the Broughton Hospital. She began writing about Broughton Hospital as the desire to record the events that happened to her and tales told to her by others whose lives were touched by this old grand hospital. Perhaps literally because a lot of these encounters include stories being physically touched by ghosts.
Wow.
She felt that if she did not record these stories, who would? And she shares that she has worked in almost every single ward of this hospital. And just walking into the building is simultaneously awe-inspiring and a little bit intimidating. Like the energy is very palpable. You can feel the history. You can feel the past, whether it's good and bad. You can feel it when you walk in.
Yeah, I would assume so, given how much has happened there and how many people are said to haunt there now. It does feel like there'd be some sort of like, I feel like when you walk up, there's this like force field that you walk through that's just like buzzing with paranormal activity.
Basically, I'm not going to read this entire book to you, but it is a really quick, easy read. I appreciate it's like bigger, larger text. And a lot of these stories are from people who worked the graveyard shift because they spent the most quiet hours. It's also the shift that Margaret worked. So she was having a lot more interaction with patients and staff during that time. I'm picking some of the more notable, spooky, and chilling tales from the book, but there are so many. The hauntings vary from screams being heard, chills running down your spines, objects disappearing, patients swearing they hear and see ghosts, patients themselves causing hauntings, doors slamming, moans and groans, full body apparitions, horrifying ghosts, and then there are, pleasantly, some more tender-hearted ghost stories. But I want to start creepy.
Okay.
We'll dabble back and forth. Beneath the Broughton Hospital runs a series of complex tunnels, and it's, like I said earlier, no one really knows what they were built for. Kind of a mystery. Some of the legends say that they were used to transport patients from ward to ward in secrecy. Some say it was for storage. Some say it was for staff to move between buildings more efficiently. But then there is one darker legend. There's a legend that says the more dangerous patients were actually handcuffed and left in the tunnels as a form of torture and punishment.
That is awful.
And I think that is perpetuated by the fact that today, when staff members have to go down there, they report hearing like disembodied screams as if someone is, and like the shaking of the pipes as if someone is handcuffed to them.
It's so horrific because it's like people were here for a specific reason. And even if they're dangerous, you don't want staff or other patients to be injured, but that is not the way to treat someone who's like that, to treat anyone. But
no, it's not. Correct.
Oh man, this is reminding me a little bit of Shutter Island in a way.
It does have that. It also has Waverly Hills vibes. Like it's very like a lot of psychiatric hospitals have these commonalities.
All of these places.
In her book, Margaret writes that she was very curious about the tunnels while working there. So she went to go see for herself. She never really had need to go down there, but so she once went down to the entrance of the tunnels and reported feeling just an intense, overwhelming energy. And she was struck by the dampness, the coldness, and the musty smell, which to me has a very like reasonable explanation given that they are tunnels with very little ventilation.
Yeah.
And they're underground, you know, those qualities come with underground tunnels. So Margaret actually spoke to a nurse who had retired from the hospital. And this nurse had told Margaret that she was working at the hospital and like no one ever wanted to go down in the tunnels, but occasionally they had to go down because there was like storage down there. And one night she had to go down there. And so she
alone, there's no buddy system.
There was no buddy system. So she goes down there, she finds the storage closet. She like in the storage closet, there's a little box. So she's like quickly putting all the things that she needs into the box. And she had left the door to the storage closet open, but she started to hear it like something on the handle and like almost like the door shaking. And she had the gut feeling that something was trying to shut the door and lock her in there.
Oh God.
Which
that just gave me the chills.
Imagination and fear, but like she definitely was experiencing the rattling of the door. So she quickly grabs the box.
Well, because I was thinking like, oh, something's trying to get out, but I wasn't at all thinking about something trying to trap her in.
Yeah. So she quickly grabs the box and she's running out and she makes it back to the entrance/exit of the tunnel. And she swore she heard somewhere down like distant tunnel, the disembodied scream
and wail of someone like pleading for help.
Which kind of reminds me of Barbarian.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, when what's his face? The guy who plays It, right? Is that what you're thinking of?
Oh, yes. But also just like her just running through the tunnel.
Oh, through the tunnels. Yeah.
So that's the tunnels. And I think a lot of the reports of the tunnels are very similar. There are two stories from more present day patients that I wanted to share. And then I'm going to go into like hauntings of past patients and staff members. But I want to say, okay, so what's hard about this is that this is a psychiatric hospital. So a lot of the patients here are coming in with mental health issues. So Margaret writes a lot about how they take some of these stories with a grain of salt, but there are 2 stories specifically that really, really stood out to her. She talked about how a lot of patients, not a lot, but they experienced patients coming in who were exhibiting possession-like symptoms, and they were claiming that they were possessed. Most often, it was a mental illness, but there was one patient who was admitted into Broughton Hospital, and clearly for confidentiality's sake, we don't know the name of the patient. We don't know any details about the patient. It is a woman. She was admitted to Broughton Hospital and claimed to be possessed. Usually, most of the staff members, they're very used to, they're trained about this, but there was something different about this patient. Everyone reported feeling instantly colder around her. They reported feeling like something dark and evil was around this patient. And this patient would occasionally speak in this really deep guttural voice and mock the staff members and detail very specific information about the staff members that she should not have had any way of knowing.
Okay, so this feels like, because this is a huge discussion when we talk about possessions and exorcisms, that mental health does play a huge role in that. And it's kind of like, how do you distinguish between someone who's really suffering from like a mental illness and someone who's truly possessed? And I feel like this is proof of possession, that she's literally in a facility with the resources to treat, hopefully, or attempt to treat some mental illnesses. The fact that she knows all of that information, I'm like getting creeped out. I'm like whispering now. I feel like the demon's gonna hear that I'm talking about it.
Well, that's always the scariest thing about possessions to me. And I feel like is a more sure sign that it is a possession is when they are regurgitating information that they should not have any knowledge of. And it is one thing where it's like, maybe, she got something out of another doctor or nurse, or was just really good at listening and overheard something. But there are more things that happened with this patient that left Margaret and other staff members feeling a bit suspicious. So there was one night, again, graveyard shift, where a nurse or staff member was doing her rounds of this ward. And as they were walking past this patient's room, they noticed like a strange light sensation outside the window. And it was like very startling because it wasn't like a passing car. There was no explanation to it. And this staff member was kind of freaking out, called Margaret, who was also on duty, and Margaret ran over. By the time Margaret arrived, the lights had disappeared. But the second Margaret arrives, now they're outside of this woman's door. It's locked from the outside. They can see the patient through the window laying in the bed. The second Margaret arrives, the lights are gone, but the patient, who was sound asleep in bed, springs up, opens their eyes wide, screams at the top of her lungs the most horrifying, terrifying wail, and then immediately lays back down in bed, falls asleep.
Okay, wait. Do we think it's paranormal, or are you suspicious of maybe alien abduction here?
I think it's paranormal, but anything is possible.
Yeah, just because I'm thinking about like the theory that astral abduction is what truly happens to people who experience alien abductions, or like certain people. And I feel like that could have aligned, like the strange lights, the almost being like slapped back into their body, maybe.
Either way, this woman is suffering so gravely, and like whatever ailment, whether it's mental health or it is a possession, she is being tormented, and it is so sad.
Yeah.
So she ended up being discharged from the hospital. And Margaret in her book is like, sometimes it's hard for me to say this, but like we all had this sigh of relief because we were just so uneasy around this patient. Yeah. And it was clearly like they weren't able to give her the help that she needed. So she was discharged. I don't know if she was sent somewhere else. They thought that all of this activity would stop. This patient is discharged. And for days following, they start to hear weird things coming from the patient's room, which is empty and locked. Lights start turning on and off. There's like weird moans and groans and shadows darting past the window inside that room after this patient has been discharged.
Okay, that's really freaky, but also part of me is feeling really happy for that patient because it appears that everything has been left behind in that room and that maybe they're actually getting some relief and some reprieve by not being there.
That's true. Maybe the entity was like, I actually like it here,
Right.
which
Like,
is
let's just wait
terrifying
for the
for
next
other
person.
people there. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Who is the next victim?
Yes.
There's a lot of people, a lot of energies there to suck from.
Okay. So this next more recent patient was a 13-year-old boy who was admitted into the hospital. He did his admittance and, where they basically ask all these questions and they check him in. And he was put into a room in one of the wards and everything was fine. He ate dinner, he was settling in, and he starts to go to bed. He wakes up a short time later in a panic. He buzzes for the nurses and he is so scared. He's like, please, please, please tell her to leave me alone. Tell her to leave me alone. And they're like, what are you talking about? And they think this is an episode, like this is a child, a teen who was just admitted in, but he's pointing over to the window and he goes, there's a woman there. Tell her to leave me alone. And begging the nurses and telling them that this woman is tormenting him. And they're all kind of staring at this boy, like really concerned. But they're also asking questions and trying to understand what he's experiencing.
Right. Yeah.
He points again to the window and he describes this woman to a T. He says what she's wearing. He says she's beautiful, but the top of her head is missing. Turns out, many years prior,
hurt my heart. In my mind, I'm totally thinking like Hannibal Lecter, like sliced just off the top of the skull.
It is. I'll tell you. Okay, so many years prior to this boy being checked into this room, trigger warning for suicide. There was a patient in this very room. Keep in mind, there is no way for this 13-year-old boy to know this. There was a patient in this very room who had apparently one day gotten a pass to go into town and very sadly purchased a gun, came back to the hospital, and that evening shot herself in the head. When she was discovered, the top of her head was missing.
Oh, man.
This 13-year-old boy was seeing her, witnessing her, and being, I don't know if it's tormented or just like the encounter itself is just, scary.
Yeah, it's just very scary to witness that. It's hard to see anyone injured.
Sure.
And seeing that is a very graphic, extreme thing to see, especially when you're already in the hospital.
And very vulnerable.
Yeah.
But so all the staff members look at each other and they're like, he's seeing this woman. I believe that they moved his room and changed his room, but like everyone was like, this is a paranormal encounter with that woman.
Totally.
So as you can tell, there is a lot of horrors that have existed and happened in the hospital, past patients. So trigger warning now, moving into this section, there is a lot of mention of suicide, violence, murder, and ultimately death. Multiple patients died by suicide in the Broughton Hospital. Some are said to still haunt the halls. Margaret's book references like a ton of hospital records and specific suicides, but I'm not going to detail the suicides. If you are interested, you can read the book. But basically, she then goes through different wards in the hospital that are said to be haunted by some of these spirits. So units 7 and 9 have been known to be haunted by a couple of spirits. This is more benign. It's like lights will go on and off and a couple of like, in your peripheral vision, you see a shadow. Back in the older days of hospital operation, Unit G was known to hold patients with the worst cases. And today, when patients are admitted into this unit, they report feeling really uneasy and being unable to sleep. Like they feel scared of that wing.
Yeah. I wonder if the feeling of like that scared feeling, if it's scared because it feels like something is looming and something is going to attack them because it's like a really scary, dangerous residual energy, or if it's scared because, again, like residual, because the people who were sent there also were very scared to be there. Like, I'm curious where like that feeling comes from.
There's probably a mix. And I'm sure some of them are maybe more of like, there's an ominous spirit, but then there's some that would be more residual energy.
Yeah.
There are reports of patients waking up in the middle of the night to something touching them while they slept. There were a couple stories where patients woke up to a voice in their ear saying, wake up, like in a very stern voice. And when they go to the nurse, they're like, why did I need to wake up? The nurse is like, I didn't do that. This is a really sad story. So apparently, and I don't know the year or date that this happened, but many years ago, there was apparently a suicide where a patient died by suicide in a stairwell that had a window out to the passing street and sidewalk.
Mm.
There have been, since that day, so many encounters of people driving past that window or walking that sidewalk past that window, and they look up and they see what appears to be a woman hanging. And
Oh,
there have been
God.
so many calls to police and reports to the hospital that they have since bricked up that window to prevent any of that from happening.
And it stopped the haunting?
I don't know if it stopped the haunting, but no one from the outside can see into that window anymore.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Ooh. Ooh, 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 ooh. This is disturbing.
It's equally disturbing, but it is more mysterious. This is the story of the Eller twins. In April of 1962, the town of Morganton was so excited because this couple, the Eller couple, was having triplets. It was like the news of the town. You know, everyone was like, the triplets are coming.
Mm-hmm.
Very sadly, on the day of their birth, the youngest, which was a boy, died nearly an hour after birth, leaving just the two girls who are now known as the Eller twins. Their names were Bobby Jean and Betty Jo Eller. They grew up like pretty normally. There was one, I think it was Bobby, who was more of like the controlling, stronger one, and Betty kind of did her fittings. But I think it was when they were in their late 20s, they started to exhibit a lot of violent behavior. The parents were like really concerned, and both of them were exhibiting this violent behavior. They would get into like verbal fights, physical fights, and it got to a point where they had to decide to send both daughters for psychiatric care.
Yeah.
And I think it was like from January through April, they were in and out of Broughton Hospital multiple times. And they were always together when they were in the psychiatric hospital. But Bobby Jean started to kind of control Betty Jo and tell her she couldn't eat, tell her to act up in certain ways. And both women were pretty much starving themselves. The hospital staff had to like give them vitamins and smoothies to try to get them to eat and have nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
And then they decided maybe they needed to separate the two girls, that by separating them, at least maybe Betty Jo, who was like the weaker and less dominating of the two, would make their own choices and eat. These two girls are screaming. They are devastated. They're like, do not separate us. Please do not separate us. But they are separated. So Bobby Jean is left on Ward 8 and Betty Jo was moved to Ward 12. These are like 2 floors separating between these 2 wards.
Mm-hmm.
There's no contact between these girls. It's 1962. That night, the night that they were separated, the nurse was doing her rounds, checking on the patients in Ward 8 when she found Bobby Jean dead in her bed. This nurse is horrified. She calls the head doctor on staff and is reporting it. And they're like, we need to get attention here immediately. Moments later, on Ward 12, they find Betty Jo also deceased.
At the same time.
Same time. They were not with each other. They were 2 floors apart. It is still to this day a mystery of how they died. There were no probable causes of death. They did autopsies. They did toxicology reports. There was no poison. There was no bruising on their bodies. Nothing. And they died within an hour of one another.
This makes me wonder because everyone talks about like kind of the secret twin language, how they can communicate without any words often. And it does make me wonder if there's...
As kids, they like made up their own language and communicate. Like people never understood what they were talking about. They communicated in their own language.
Holy crap. Wait, I want to see a picture of them. Is there one that exists?
There are 2 photos that we can put in here right now. There's a photo of one of them, and I do believe they were identical twins. So you can look at that. And then there's a photo of their graves.
It makes me wonder if like that sort of language between them kind of almost happens. Like, I guess the only words I have for it would be like on the astral plane. Like it just happens like somewhere else outside of our current earthly state. And it makes me wonder if it's that much easier for them to decide to just be in that form always.
Right. I have no idea. But the fact that they're 2 floors apart.
Like, could they still communicate 2 floors apart?
Right. Probably. I mean, truly, it's such a mystery. And there's like a ton of articles that were written about this because it was such a mystery that no one understood how these 2 sisters, these twins, died within an hour of each other.
Mm-hmm.
and there's no probable cause, no toxins or poison in their body. There was no
Yeah.
markings. There was no indication of like suffocation, nothing.
There's a few spooky stories out there relating to twins that involve like twin psychosis and these weird sort of deaths, even when separated. I'll have to
Right.
find some of them and show you the names of the twins that I'm thinking of right now because I don't remember. But like it is so freaky when that happens. It's like, how?
Right.
I get that they were starving themselves too. So, like part of that maybe.
Right. So there is some like belief that maybe one of them, basically due to having starved themselves for so long, had passed away in their sleep. And then the other, due to their connection as twins, also died.
Yeah, just like a broken heart, the stress of knowing the other part of you is gone.
It is believed that the Eller twins are still around and possibly haunting people in the hospital because both wards 8 and 12 are haunted. They were apparently very mischievous in life, so people believe that they are pranking hospital staff still to this day. Occasionally they'll hear like a commotion kind of down the hall. Like, so just say like a nurse is at the nurse's station by their computer. It's late at night.
Mm-hmm.
They hear a commotion. They go check what's going on. They find nothing. But when they go back to their desk and the computer, something will be missing. And they believe it's the Eller twins.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It feels impossible to know. Like, this is one of those questions that I have for every place that has multiple hauntings, where it's like you associate a certain haunting behavior with someone that you know that's passed, that is like in,
right,
I guess, ghostly form. Like, how do you know it's them?
You don't.
If there are like 100 other spirits there.
You don't. Especially if you're not physically seeing them and able to identify their spiritual form. But I think it's just this idea of trying to connect it to something traumatic or tragic that did happen there. And the connections of, okay, the same type of haunting is happening on Ward 8 and Ward 12. The Eller twins were on Ward 8 and 12 when that happened. Like, I think they just tried to connect the dots there a little bit.
Right.
So now there is a cemetery on the property. We have a photo of the cemetery on the YouTube if you would like to see. It's simultaneously sad and heartwarming. So shortly after opening the doors at Western Carolina Insane Asylum, as it opened in 1883, the hospital saw a need for a cemetery. This is actually a really sweet reason. So the very first superintendent of the hospital, which I'm going to talk about him in a little bit, but he was very aware of, at the time when people were being admitted into psychiatric hospitals and facilities like this, a lot of them were being dumped there. A lot of them didn't have family who wanted or could take care of them. And there were also a lot of like unwed women who were pregnant who would be left here. And unfortunately, a lot of their children died in childbirth. And I think it was commonplace when patients died at psychiatric hospitals and they didn't have family members to claim their bodies for burial purposes. Their bodies would be donated basically to research, to be like picked apart and studied. And the superintendent of the hospital was not about that. He was like, I want everyone who is admitted into this hospital, if they are being abandoned by their family, that at least they have a final resting place that we can give them and provide to them. So if someone's body was not claimed after death, they would bury them on property. The cemetery grounds were constructed, and there are now 1,583 people, including several infants that were born at the asylum, buried in the cemetery. It is a heartbreaking number of patients, but every single patient buried in the hospital cemetery is documented. Their name is known. They have records. They are marked, and they each have gravestones.
That is unheard of.
Seriously. I'm thinking of Athens, Ohio asylum, where it's just numbers.
Which, I mean, as much as people were horrified by that it's just numbers, at least they got a number. There's a lot that are just unmarked completely. Or just there's a marker with like no identification, like no way to trace them back. Like you don't know that number 3 is so-and-so because you don't know even who's down there.
So that is positive, at least. And there are some hauntings associated with the cemetery. Not a ton, but people have caught photos of figures in the cemetery. I tried to find some of them and I couldn't find any online. So if you are gatekeeping these photos,
I hate that. I hate when that happens. Yeah. Put them online, man.
Just
share them.
And then It is also said that the cemetery is haunted by some of the spirits that are buried there. There was one story Margaret wrote about in her book where she said that there was one night she was working late at night and she heard like a woman scream coming from outside the window, so outside the building in the direction of the cemetery. So she called hospital police and they went to go investigate and they reported that they didn't find anything. Margaret then kind of goes on a little bit of a tangent and she's like, I think the hospital police are sworn to secrecy and are hiding and gatekeeping secrets about the paranormal. They 100% know something and they're not telling us, or they're not allowed to, but they have seen spirits and don't talk about it.
Probably.
Yeah.
I feel like based on the emails that we've gotten from people that have worked like security or whatnot at like various hospitals and places, like for sure, they all have stories.
Sure. Okay, so now let's get into the staff because there are previous staff members haunting the hospital. There are a lot of stories that we've talked about and will cover in a little bit that come with tragedy, but there are also some that are pleasant. So again, I'm going to go back and forth like nice, sweet, and then sad and tragic.
Okay.
There are spirits who once served the hospital as staff and truly poured their hearts and souls into attempting to give love and to aid the patients of the hospital. After all, many of them were abandoned with little care. And so staff members really did try to do their best to give them grace and love in the last days, months, years of their lives. So the very first superintendent, who I've mentioned a couple times, he's the one who built the cemetery and he's the one who like was all about patient care. His name was Dr. Patrick Livingston Murphy. He and his wife, Betty, took the task of opening and helping support the hospital and even moved onto hospital grounds to do so. Dr. Murphy loved and cared so much about this hospital and the patients. He worked and lived there until his death in 1907. He actually died on the property. He had cancer later in his life, so he died in one of the like hospital rooms basically. And his last act in life was to ask that his cancerous parts of his body were sent to Johns Hopkins Hospital to be studied in the hopes of finding a cure for cancer.
I love that.
He worked at the hospital for 25 years and brought so much joy into his work. And it is believed that he is still monitoring the halls and checking in on patients and staff and just making sure the hospital is still running and operating.
That's a good guy to have in astral form wandering around.
Totally. But it is really sad because it was right after he died that the hospital kind of went downhill into the malpractice.
Oh,
so
my
I
God.
imagine his spirit was probably like so devastated seeing like all the malpractices that were happening.
Totally.
But today, this is like such a cute story. So there was a staff librarian who worked at the hospital and she was in the library late at night and it was about like, you know, it was kind of the end of the night. So she was getting ready to leave, but she started hearing like music and almost as if a party was happening. She's like, that's weird. What's going on? So she goes out of the library to go see what's happening and she sees two spirits in old-timey clothes in a waltz dancing together. And she knew it was Betty and Patrick.
Oh my gosh, how cute is that? It's date night.
It's date
at the
night.
Hospital.
Isn't this so cute?
That is so sweet. I love that they're having a good time.
Me too. Now, this is also another pleasant one. This is the spirit of Mrs. Marsh, and there's a photo of her. She was the first matron of the hospital in 1883. And when she first started working there, she had recently become widowed. Her husband had recently passed away. And so she really, really threw herself into her work and was very passionate about her work. And her job was to, you know, help make sure that the hospital was tidy. And she took on the role of clothing patients and making sure they had clean clothing and that their bedrooms were clean as well.
Mm-hmm.
And she was a stickler. Like she was like all about cleanliness and very prompt with time. And apparently every night at 9 p.m., she would do a round of the ward and make sure that everyone was in bed because that was curfew, 9 p.m.
Yep.
And she would do this round with a lantern in her hand.
Spooky.
Some people report seeing a ghostly apparition with a lantern in her hand and a white apron patrolling the hospital grounds. Can you guess at what time?
At bedtime?
9 p.m. every night.
9 p.m.?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I do like that Because she's going around, she's providing a nightlight while
Yeah.
also simultaneously being like, hey, maybe it's time to tuck in.
Yeah. And just checking on everyone. How's everyone doing?
Yeah.
But she'll appear and disappear very quickly. So, you just for a second can see her, but she's still doing her rounds. Okay. Pivoting to something a little bit darker, here is another story, trigger warning for murder, suicide, and violence. This is a more recent story. On April 22nd of 1971, there was a horrible murder-suicide that occurred at the hospital in an office of the Morrison building. It shook the hospital and the surrounding area, and we have a photo of a newspaper article from what happened. According to this article, a psychiatrist and a nurse died in a murder-suicide. The psychiatrist, Dr. Paul Douglas, was 37, had been living on the hospital grounds with his wife and kids, and a nurse named Mrs. Betty Sue Cheek Yarborough, who was 39, were both found dead from knife wounds in what appeared to be a murder-suicide. I'm not going to go into the details of the violence and the death, but basically they were discovered. Mrs. Betty Yarborough was deceased from knife wounds or stab wounds. And then Dr. Paul Douglas was found with a knife in his chest, meaning he died second.
Yeah.
According to rumors, the two were engaged in a clandestine affair, ended in this tragedy. Something occurred and Dr. Paul Douglas murdered Mrs. Betty Yarborough and then took his own life. Basically, what had happened is that a nurse down the hall heard a commotion and ran towards the office and found the door locked. When they finally got into the office, they found the bodies of these two.
So horrible.
This is really sad. So when the book was written, this building still was standing, but there were plans to demolish it and construct a parking lot for the hospital. So I don't know if this building still exists. But when it was still standing, people would hear, I think this is residual, but they would hear the like screams and the commotion from that same office.
Jeez. Let's hope it's residual because I can't imagine anything worse than having to like relive that over and over in your spirit form. This makes me question. So, we've talked about like how we always go back to the Bell Witch Cave because that was like the first example of this, of us learning that this can happen, where a part of you can chip off in death and kind of fester and become its own entity. And then more recently, in the past couple of years, we've talked about how people who go to therapy or people who are just in various spiritual work will go and try to find the lost and chipped off pieces of themselves. And it does make me wonder that if people like this, who, if it's not residual, like let's pretend that there is this horrified, traumatized, as awful as it is to say, like a traumatized piece of this person that just continues to exist in spirit form here at this hospital. I'm curious if in the next life or if in like 3 lives from now, that person has to go and it like does the self-work to try to find that part of them and heal that piece of them. Wow. And does that stop the haunting? Is that how the haunting ceases to exist? Because they collect it back.
But that involves like so much past life work on top of therapy.
I know.
And we were just talking about how it's not the easiest to get access to.
Yeah.
But I would love for that to be true. And I hope that these spirits have peace. But I knew that was a dark story. So I'm going to cheer us up. Okay. Literally with the ghost of Miss Cheer Upper. That was her nickname.
What a good nickname.
So this woman, her name was Miss Daisy Smoot, was a volunteer who would visit the hospital and bring crafts and supplies and volunteer. So she would come like once a week with all of her crafts and sit with patients and help, bring them cheer. Hence the nickname Miss Cheer Upper. And she still visits in the afterlife. People report having this like sensation of someone with like so much joy and love visiting them. A lot of patients will like feel her around. She like physically will interact with them. Again, this is one of those ones where it's like, how do you know exactly it's her? But I think there's just been enough commonalities of this like joyous feeling and then connecting the dots to someone who brought such cheer to the hospital in the past. I think that's just like how they've put it together. People will feel a sense of like a kind, supportive hand on their shoulder or on their arm if they're doing something or if they're going through treatment and being taken care of. It's a very loving, caring, motherly type of haunting. So people don't doubt that Miss Daisy still walks the halls and is very gentle and felt by all patients. Today, in the basement of the Scroggs building, people experience a very oppressive feeling. And this is like an urban legend amongst people who worked there. But there used to be a drink machine down in the basement. And the rumor spread that when you put money into the machine and press the button, and as your drink would come and descend into the pit, there would emit a scream.
I love that.
Yeah, I know.
That's actually super fun. That feels kind of like an amusement park sort of situation.
Yes, aside from the fact that there's an oppressive, like sad, dark feeling about this basement. So
Right.
it does feel like something
Right.
tragic happened here.
But you do get the choice to, like, if you don't want that to happen, don't get a drink.
Don't get a drink
You
from
know?
down there. Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are other drink machines. Okay. Now, this haunting has a pleasant, and this is like the last major haunting that I'll share. Again, if you're interested in hearing more, you can read any of these books. There's plenty of hauntings about Broughton Hospital to go around. Like you can tell, there are so many buildings and different wards. I think there's 60-ish buildings at Broughton Hospital, but there are multiple buildings with haunted elevators. Trigger warning, this is a very sad story. There in 1989, a nurse was sadly attacked and killed in one of the elevators when two patients had plotted an escape plan and somehow finagled this nurse into the elevator in a ruse and then attacked the nurse, subdued him, and murdered him.
Wow.
It is said that his spirit still lingers in the elevators, and people will like see elevator doors open and close, but no one's in there. The elevator will ride up and down floors, but no one's in there and no one's pressed buttons. And they believe it's the spirit of this man. But this more pleasant elevator haunting involves a man with fluffy pink slippers. The elevators in the F ward are also apparently haunted and similarly do a lot of the like going up and down on the floors. No one's on there, doors opening and closing. Seems like someone's riding the elevator, but no one's actually there. But this ghost appears in physical form quite often. People report stepping onto the elevator to go wherever they need to go. And right before the doors close, a man will stick his hand in and come join them in the elevator. This man is wearing a checked shirt, overalls, and fuzzy pink bedroom slippers. And he will just shuffle into the elevator, stand there, not press any buttons, and just ride the elevator with people and never get off and then just disappear.
He feels like a modern day ghost given his outfit. Like, I feel like that is absolutely what people would wear today.
I think it's like people believe he's the 1950s era, like based on his attire. He's somewhere from the 1950s. So as you can tell, there are so many hauntings at this hospital. The staff housing is also said to be haunted. There's a toilet poltergeist that flushes the toilet, will turn lights on and off. There are some places in the hospital that give off ominous and bad feelings, but there are also pleasant spirits looking out for patients and staff members alike. There is no doubt that there is a lot of energy in this hospital, some positive, some evil, but it makes sense given how many deaths and how much energy has passed through the walls of this hospital that it continues to exist and has opened a portal in a place for many paranormal happenings to occur. And here's a photo of the book again if you want to read it. Haunted Broughton, More Tales from the Graveyard Shift by Margaret M Langley.
Dang. And that's just the information that you got from one book.
Yeah, correct. And there's 3. And then this is just like from Margaret's interaction with people.
That is so wild.
Mm-hmm.
But also so genius of Margaret because she was collecting firsthand stories. Like, not only did she have stories herself, but like she had access to all of the different employees there. Like, yeah, she did so much research on the history and other stories that exist there. But if you work in a haunted place, like you already have multiple chapters probably just based on your knowledge of what everyone else has experienced and what the lore is.
So what are you doing? Email it to us.
Duh.
Or
That's what
write
we're
your
trying
own
to
book.
say. Or write your own book. And then send it to us.
And then we'll do an episode. Yeah.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. Wow. So I did look up in our inbox if we had any emails from this specific hospital, and we didn't.
Okay.
Which maybe is a good thing, you know?
Yeah.
Sometimes I have to remind myself, like, oh, well, maybe that's good that no one was in the hospital and haunted at this particular place.
Right.
But we did have quite a few other emails about haunted hospitals, and I'm going to share one from Shanna. Hi, Sabrina and Corinne. My name is Shanna, and I'm a relatively recent listener. I'm so sorry that I just discovered your podcast because I do love it so much, and you guys are so awesome.
We're glad you found it eventually.
Yeah, it doesn't matter when.
Now you
got
have a lot of content to catch up on.
That's fun to just binge. Anyways, I got to tell you about my experience at a haunted hospital. Kind of creepy, but kind of cool at the same time. When I was in the Army, I was stationed at Tripler Army Medical Center in Hawaii, which is not too far from Pearl Harbor. Coincidence? I think not. I worked in a part of the hospital that sterilized surgical instruments for the operating room, so a lot of weird stuff would happen. From constantly seeing people walking out of the corner of your eye to literally seeing doors open with no one around. But I'll give you two of the best stories that I have. The first was one night, a coworker and I were in the back room wrapping some towel packs for the OR, while our sergeant was in the break room lying down because he didn't feel well. No worries about that. He was a very good guy and we wanted him to feel better. So my coworker and I, let's call her Sheila, we worked for hours together, and when we walked back out to the prep and pack room, which was lined with large glass and metal cabinets filled with the extra surgical instruments that we used to fill the instrument sets, if they were missing, we found that all of the cabinets were open and every single instrument was dumped out onto the floor.
Jeez.
So that means that there were about 30 cabinets opened and hundreds of metal instruments all over the floor. And we had not heard a single thing from this room. And we were just one room away.
This honestly, more than anything, is like less scary and more of like, what a nuisance. 30 medical cabinets now that they have to pick up and replace and put back together.
Hundreds. And it's also, they have to be sterilized. Like, it's not just like you can, I would probably break down and cry and quit, honestly.
Yeah, I'd be like, I'm done. Sorry, can't do it anymore.
Send me home.
That would send me over the edge for sure.
Yo, for sure.
Just like us setting up for the podcast, and when my headphones don't connect properly, like I just get irrationally angry. I'm like, I'm done. I give up. I'm done.
And sometimes we're like, okay, let's just record another day.
Yeah.
Sheila and I stood there staring at the chaos that surrounded us and could not believe our eyes. Then we marched into the break room and we confronted our sergeant because he had to have done this. And he just made us more work. He assured us that no, he'd been asleep one room away as well. And he also had not heard a thing.
Also, why would he do that? You know?
Right. Yeah, that's so mean. Like, that's not a prank. And also, he was supposed to be helping them to begin with. So it would be creating more work for him. We only had 2 hours until the day shift came and we had to clean up the mess. And neither of us could explain how this could have happened. Needless to say, we had to stay up really late to finish cleaning up. And we had no excuse to our head nurse for the mess when they arrived. We all got counseled, aka written up, for the mess as well.
That's so
what
shitty.
A night.
Obviously, you didn't do that on purpose. And like, obviously, you didn't even do it. Who would do that?
Also, where are the cameras? Like, are there cameras? I would assume there are cameras in the supply room.
I feel like if it was like medicine, there would be a camera.
Yeah.
But if it's just equipment, maybe not.
Okay. My second story is a doppelganger. Oh yeah, this one is creepy. So backstory. The weekend shifts were 12-hour shifts worked by 2 soldiers in the same area that I just described.
Mm-hmm.
I always worked with the same soldier. We made a really great team. When there was a code blue called in the hospital, so a patient that was dying, we were required to go to the responding unit and replace their crash cart. One weekend, there were multiple code blues called throughout the day, and the soldier that I had worked with, we'll call him Max, and I took turns going and replacing the crash cart. Well, at one point, Max came back to the unit. He took the crash cart into the supply room to resupply, made eye contact with me, waved as he went into the room, and then he closed the door. I waved as well, and I just knew that it was my turn to go next time they called code blue. Just then, the phone rang and I answered it, and it was Max's wife. So I walked back and I yelled for him, but he didn't answer. So I walked back and I told his wife, well, I guess he walked back out, and that I would tell him to call her back when I see him. 3 hours later, Max comes back and I asked him where he had been, and he said he'd been up on the 6th floor waiting for the crash cart. I said, no way, I just saw you 3 hours ago bring the crash cart back, and you waved at me and everything. He said, Shanna, I swear to God, I've been up on the 6th floor for the last 3 hours. And so I just sat there staring at him, and I said, well, you have a doppelganger then. I told him the story about what I saw, and I said, oh yeah, and Jane called, so you need to call her back. He was blown away. But we still stay in touch to this day. He's still alive, so maybe the superstition around doppelgangers isn't totally true. But there you go. Kind of creepy. Oh, and also I had a huge autoclave turn on and start filling with steam while I was inside of it on my hands and knees cleaning it, which made my heart stop because I had actually shut off the main power switch, so that would have been impossible.
Oh my
Took
God.
a few years off my life for sure. Stay spooky. See you on the other side. Shanna.
Okay, when it comes to the doppelganger thing, I wonder if it's just because clearly that was a really, really hard day. There were so many cold blues. There was a lot of deaths. Like, I wonder if just the adrenaline and the sadness or just the intensity of the work created this like residual haunting almost
Yeah,
rather than it actually being a doppelganger.
right. It would be weird if it actually was Max coming down because one, he didn't come out of the room. So it would have required him to have no memory of actually going down and back up, and Shanna to have no memory of him leaving the room.
Right.
And he also didn't have the crash cart. So it's like, it clearly was something paranormal, but yeah, it is odd that that did happen.
And creepy. I mean, this place is definitely very haunted.
Yeah. I'm curious to waiting for 3 hours. Did they need the crash cart? I feel like that's a long time to wait. I would have just come back down and been like, hello? Are you bringing it up? But I guess if they didn't get another code blue, then
They
like,
didn't
why
get
would
another
they
call. Yeah,
be
they
doing
wouldn't need
it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, true. So strange.
Well, if you have hauntings from hospitals or if you have hauntings from literally anywhere in the world, alien encounters, anything creepy, please email them to us at twogirlsoneghostpodcast@gmail.com. And reminder, like we said in the beginning, you can get episodes ad-free and 1 week early on Patreon. Our one tier, you get that plus so much other bonus content and book club and discount on merch and a sticker. It's $5 a month on Patreon.
Rate and review. Follow us on socials. Tell everybody about us. Keep coming back because we love ghost stories. And it's May or June now.
It's June, almost July.
The time that this comes out, which means just a couple more months until we're all putting on our...
Which means your wee one has arrived, Corinne.
He's here.
He's here.
And I've already bought him a bright orange onesie for Halloween. Not for Halloween, but just for the month of October, which is coming up. And everybody loves ghost stories. So this is the time to send us your emails so that we have even more
haunting tales,
horrifying tales to tell you. In the meantime, keep coming back. Shout out to Jamie Ryan, who edits both our audio and our video episodes.
And thank you to all of you for joining us every week. We love you so much. And
we will see you on the other side.